The following program is transcribed. Dorothy Kilgallen's Diary, the intimate behind-the-scenes story of Broadway's great stars, revealed by the First Lady of Broadway, the famous columnist and radio personality, Dorothy Kilgallen.
Thank you, Walter Hurley. My diary yesterday shows I spent the afternoon with a very fine mother and her cute baby daughter. If that little girl takes after her mother, she'll really have a voice, because the fond parent's name is Mary Small. You know, that name, Mary Small, is a mighty familiar one to a great many GIs, and for a very good reason. Mary, as you know, is a famous singing star, but you may not know she's entertained GI audiences at Army camps here in this country, such as Camp Dix and Camp Shanks, that she's brightened up many a hospital patient in military institutions, such as Halloran in the New York area, and in Louisville, Kentucky, and in Pittsburgh, and many more places. She really puts her heart in those performances.
You can say that again, Dorothy Kilgallen. I can't say just how those vocals sound, but I know that I never tried so hard to really sell a number.
Mary, you've entertained at so many camps and hospitals. What would you say was the most touching experience you've had?
Well, it's hard to choose, but I'd say it was the time our company was appearing at a hospital down in Louisville. I was going to sing before a group of soldiers who were heading overseas. This was their last entertainment for a long time in the good old USA. Before I went on to do my numbers, their commanding officer gave a speech. He told them to make good use of their training, and then he closed with these words: "Men, you know as well as I, some of you will not be coming back. But I know from having worked with you that you're ready and willing to pay that price for freedom." Well, after that, I was it. That is, I had to sing the farewell song, and I had such a lump in my throat, I don't know how I got the song out.
Mary, in visiting our military hospitals, you must have seen how far our bond dollars go to buy the finest medical care and attention.
Yes, Dorothy, I certainly did. You take the one time when I was entertaining in a hospital in the South. After I'd gotten through with my regular show, one of the nurses said to me, "Miss Small, there are 2 patients who missed your show because they weren't well enough to be in the auditorium. Maybe you could sing them just one song?" I said yes, naturally, and when I got inside the ward, I saw these 2 men lying there smiling at me. I said, "What number would you like?" And one of them grinned and said, "Will you sing 'I Had a Little Talk with the Lord'?" Well, that was strange in a way, because that song was written by a very special friend of mine, his name, Vic Mizzy. So I was happy to tell them, "Boys, I'm glad you asked for one of my husband's songs."
Mary, speaking of your husband, Vic Mizzy, you didn't mention that he served in the Navy.
That's right, as an assistant chaplain. That's how I got to singing in chapel at several of the Navy bases here in this country. You know, it was pretty different from doing some jazz number over the air, but I wouldn't trade that experience for the best radio contract in the world.
I'm sure you wouldn't, Mary, and I'm glad you've spoken about what victory bonds mean to you. Of course, there's another aspect to it, and that is, in addition to buying all the things needed for medical help, these bonds represent a sound, common-sense investment. So it's a case where patriotism and good hard sense go hand in hand. Why, do you realize $4 come back to you for every $3 in E-bonds held to maturity? Of course, even if that weren't so, every American would want to get behind this victory drive because it helps care for our wounded.
And helps bring our boys back home.
Right, Mary Small. And buying victory bonds helps pay off and provide benefits for the 8 million veterans to be discharged by next July. So all in all, who can say no to the suggestion, buy that extra victory bond? I'm sure that you, Mary Small, after seeing those bond dollars at work, will answer a great big yes.
Thank you, Mary Small, and thank you, Dorothy Kilgallen, for showing us your diary. Now, this is Walter Hurley saying, we won the war. Secure the peace with victory bonds. The following program is transcribed. Dorothy Kilgallen's Diary, the intimate behind-the-scenes story of Broadway's great stars, revealed by the First Lady of Broadway, the famous columnist and radio personality, Dorothy Kilgallen.
Thank you, Walter Hurley. My diary shows I had a lot of fun the other night. I went with some friends to one of the New York hotels because a band leader I knew was opening an engagement there. His name, Shep. During an intermission, he told me he'd just come back from the most thrilling trip he'd ever taken. He and the men in his band just returned from playing before GI audiences in France and Germany. To look at him, you'd have thought Shep and his men had been on a vacation. But don't imagine that they didn't work hard. They entertained thousands of men and in a very short time.
As a matter of fact, Dorothy, Just to keep the record straight, we played to almost 1 million men in 8 weeks.
You certainly did get around. You must have gotten a real first-hand picture of how our fighting forces are being taken care of. I'm sure all our listeners with relatives over there would be interested, especially those whose loved ones may have been injured.
Well, Dorothy, I learned one thing right off the bat, and it made a big impression on me. We visited a splendidly furnished hospital in Stuttgart. I walked in, looked around, expecting to find some seriously injured men. But I was surprised to find that on the whole they weren't anything like as serious injuries I'd seen playing before hospital audiences back in America. I asked the nurse why. She said, well, Mr. Fields, we have evacuated all such cases as can be moved. They are being cared for in the hospitals back home in America.
Isn't that wonderful? Well, Shep, after playing to so many GI audiences, both here and overseas, you ought to have a good idea about the musical likes and dislikes of our veterans.
In general, I'd say they are about like any other average group of Americans. They like their music both sweet and hot. But there's one exception to that.
What do you mean, Shep?
You take the boys who have been injured more seriously. I know a bit about them because our band toured quite a few hospitals here in the States. Each place we struck, we'd play our regular performance with a full band in the hospital auditorium. After that came the job that was the biggest thrill of all. We made up a 6-piece combination, called ourselves the Short Snorters, and used to go around playing in the wards. We'd walk in, grouped together there among the beds. I'd say, well, men, what'll it be? Anything from pop to boogie-woogie. You name it, we'll play it.
And what do they ask for?
Believe it or not, Dorothy, it was always a sentimental ballad. They just liked to hear songs about the American girl waiting for them back in their hometown. Novelty numbers and rhythm tunes didn't seem to interest patients like that.
Well, Shep, what sort of thing do they tell you, these men who have sacrificed so much in the fight for freedom?
I think I can answer that best by telling you what one corporal had to say. I asked him how he felt about getting back here in America and being nursed back to health. He looked up at me and said, Mr. Fields, I don't think there's anything particularly heroic about it. Seems like every good American fought this war the best way he could. Those of us who had to stay at home pitched in and did their job. Those of us who were able to go overseas did our job over there. Now we're back and we can all work together here at home to make this peace last.
That was really a very wonderful thought, Shep. And I can only think of one thing to say next to those men who fought for us and for all America overseas. They finished their job, let's finish ours. And that means get out and buy those victory bonds, every single bond you can afford. And when you've done that, buy another. That's the message Shep Fields and I would like to leave with you now.
Thank you, Shep Fields, and thank you, Dorothy Kilgallen, for showing us your diary. Now this is Walter Hurley saying, help bring the boys home. Buy and hold victory bonds. The following program is transcribed. Dorothy Kilgallen's diary. The intimate behind-the-scenes.
The following program is transcribed. Dorothy Kilgallen's diary. The intimate behind-the-scenes story of Broadway's great stars, revealed by the First Lady of Broadway, the famous columnist and radio personality, Dorothy Kilgallen.
Thank you, Kelvin Keith. My diary shows I had lunch yesterday with one of the most popular young men in entertainment circles. I saw a group of people gathered about grandparents. In a way, I saw the answer sitting there and Alec Templeton. Well, and I was next to Alec and was laughing, and as most of you know from listening to your radio, Alec Templeton has a wit and humor that's really infectious. Yet those of you who've heard his brilliant work as a pianist know that there's one thing that means more to Alec than anything else in the world: music. He happens to be right here now, and I'd like to ask him about his trip overseas to entertain the troops. First of all, Alec, what territory did you cover?
France and England and Scotland and Wales. And we traveled over 3,000 miles, and I did 49 shows in 23 days.
My word, you really went fast. How did you go, by plane all the time?
No, we traveled with a car, and we had all our own equipment with us. We had mics, our own piano, our own recording setup. In fact, we traveled we took the whole thing with us.
It must have been a large car, more of a trailer, I should think.
Yes, we had a trailer behind it. It was quite hard to do, but it was really a wonderful thing.
And what sort of thing did you do for the boys?
Well, what I tried to do was to give them a bit of home. They had all sorts of favorites, varied tastes, from Liebestraum and Clair de Lune, sometimes, very often, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, and of course their old favorite boogie. And a lot of singing, too. They loved to community sing.
Did you get them singing their old favorite songs?
Oh, yes,
Group?
such things as Deep in the Heart of Texas and Pistol Packin' Mama and all sorts of things like that, and Home on the Range, and they did join in.
You really have to have a repertoire, don't you, when you go on a trip like that?
Oh, rather, yes, I've got asked for things, and very often I think, my goodness, that piece. I haven't played it in years, and then it just comes so fresh to me as if I'd played it all the time, you know?
Did any of them ever ask you anything that you couldn't come forth with?
No. I don't think there was anything they didn't ask that
I guess there really isn't anything that you don't know from Bach to boogie, is there?
Well, there are maybe some things, but you can't know everything, you know.
Did you play for some of the boys in the hospitals?
Yes, I did the hospitals, and also, when I'd done the shows in the hospitals, I visited all the wards.
How was the morale over there?
Well, it was very wonderful, really. The feeling that they were very, very longing to come home. That was the feeling I had all the time, of course, and so
yes,
that's why I wanted to give them that feeling of home. And so that was the feeling that the more things they liked, particularly things pertaining to radio. So I gave them a lot of radio impressions.
Well, I guess that they know that we're all longing to have them home, too, and
sure
it just adds up to one thing, doesn't it, Alex?
It certainly does. Even though this war is over, young folk, old folk, brunettes, blondes, everybody join with me and buy and hold those victory bonds.
Thank you, Alex. It's been a pleasure having this little talk with you, and I'm awfully glad you brought out how important it is for all of us to keep on buying those victory bonds.
Thank you, Alec Templeton, and thank you, Dorothy Kilgallen, for showing us your diary. Now, this is Calvin Keats saying, keep faith with our wounded, buy and hold victory bonds.
The following program is transcribed. Dorothy Kilgallen's diary. The intimate behind-the-scenes story of Broadway's great stars, revealed by the First Lady of Broadway, the famous columnist and radio personality, Dorothy Kilgallen.
Thank you, Walter Hurley. My diary yesterday shows I had a most interesting experience. I was walking along Fifth Avenue, and I saw a couple coming along hand in hand. I said to myself, I'll bet that officer has just come back from overseas. And I was right. What's more, the closer I got, the more familiar they both looked. Yes, they were two very good friends of mine. The man had served as a major overseas. He was the prominent radio announcer, Andre Baruch, and his wife, the charming and famous singer so many of you know as Bee Wain. Well, we stopped and talked, and Bee acted just like any average happy wife whose man has finally come home. She told me they were having the time of their lives, getting in lots of golf and things like that.
Oh, now, just a minute, Dorothy Kilgallen. I appreciate the compliment, but don't give the people the idea that I haven't a serious thought in my head, or that all I like to do is play golf and sing.
You know I didn't mean that, Bee. As a matter of fact, I remember how you spent so much time traveling about the country these last few years, singing for wounded servicemen in hospitals and for GI audiences at the various camps. Let's see, I know you played many an engagement at Halloran General Hospital here in the New York area. Where else did you entertain?
Well, Dorothy, I sang for the men in a great number of our military hospitals all over the country. And I wouldn't trade those experiences for anything in the world.
Suppose you tell us what was the most unusual experience you had entertaining those GI audiences.
Well, that's easy, Dorothy. This little incident almost had a very unpleasant ending. My husband, Andre, has never stopped kidding me about it. Once I was singing for some wounded Navy men at a hospital outside of Minneapolis. One of the boys kept clapping and shouting, wonderful, solid, and all that sort of thing. Before I left, he told me that he expected to leave the hospital and return home very soon. He said, Miss Wain, if I ever see you singing in some vaudeville theater, I'll come backstage and say hello. Well, a few months later, he did just that. Only he brought his wife with him. And I soon found out that she thought her man was too much interested in my singing. Well, there was only one thing to do. I got out a batch of letters that I'd received from my husband overseas, and that settled things nicely.
Well, Bee, I know you must have seen a great many touching sights along the Purple Heart circuit. What experience would you say was the most moving of all?
Well, there was one time at Halloran General Hospital that I'll never forget. I was singing in one of the wards. All about me lay wounded soldiers smiling and grinning at me. Off to one side, there was a young soldier who had a serious spine injury. I knew that he hadn't walked in over a year, and I wanted to do my best to help put a smile on his face. Well, it's rather hard for me to believe, but here's exactly what happened. Halfway through my song, I believe it was Deep Purple, I heard some of the patients shouting, "Look at Kenny, look at him, will you?" And then I saw him. That wounded soldier had gotten up out of bed and was taking his first few halting steps toward me in order to see and hear better. Believe me, I finished that song with a real sure throb in my voice. And you can imagine that after an experience like that, I couldn't wait to go on doing what little I could to entertain gallant Americans like Kenny.
I can certainly understand that, Bee, and I'll bet that your hospital tours have shown you a real reason for buying that extra victory bond.
Yes, indeed.
And I just hope all of our listeners feel the very same way. Just remember, it isn't only our wounded that you'll be helping when you buy victory bonds, although that cause is reason enough, but our returning soldiers and sailors must have a stake to start again in civilian life. The law provides up to $300 per man. Well, you can just figure out for yourself how many bond dollars we'll have to raise to accomplish some of these things for our returning veterans. And I hope that this little visit with the famous singer, B. Wain, makes you realize the importance of buying those bonds more than ever.
Thank you, B. Wain, and thank you, Dorothy Kilgallen, for showing us your diary. Now this is Walter Hurley saying, pay your debt to America's wounded. Buy bonds.
The program is transcribed. Dorothy Kilgallen's diary, the intimate behind-the-scenes story of Broadway's great stars, revealed by the First Lady of Broadway, the famous columnist and radio personality, Dorothy Kilgallen.
Thank you, Kelvin Keach. My diary shows I ran into an old friend of mine in one of the broadcasting studios here in New York. He'd just finished singing on an air show, and he came striding down the corridor. He's well set up and athletic-looking, and I understand that when he went to college up in McGill University in Montreal, he won letters in football, hockey, water polo, basketball, wrestling, and boxing. Well, have you guessed who I'm talking about? Yes, Dick Todd is right. Well, he got telling me about his USO tours, and I couldn't help but think how characteristic those travels were of the Dick Todd I knew. He's a pretty rugged sort of chap, and he's one of the few USO performers ever to play at bases deep in the jungles of Central America. They tell me some of his tours were so dangerous that he was granted permission to carry a weapon.
For the record, Dorothy, it was a knife. Only the armed forces can carry guns.
Well, Dick Todd, for the record, suppose you tell us some of the many places you've hit while entertaining Uncle Sam's boys.
Well, I've been lucky enough to get around quite a bit. I've sung before G.I. Joes from Panama to the Roy Islands in the Pacific. I've entertained in Peru, Honduras, Ecuador, Nicaragua, and a few places whose names I never found out. Though I do remember the fine American troops we saw everywhere.
Speaking of those troops, what stands out most in your memory?
I remember how set they were on getting the job over and getting back home. You just can't realize, unless you've lived among these men, how they dream about getting back to their families and friends.
Tell us, Dick, now what was the most exciting experience you had in your overseas tour for the USO?
There's no question about that, Dorothy. Our group took off from the harbor at Corinto, and it wasn't long after we'd climbed above the water that something went wrong, very wrong. The next thing I knew, we were dropping down, and all I could think of was this must be how it feels when an elevator suddenly drops hundreds of feet. We hit the water with a crash, but the pilot was so skilled that he prevented the plane from sinking and not one of us was injured. But I still get a funny feeling in my knees when I think about that little flight.
Dick, there's one thing I'd like to ask. I know you entertained at a good many military hospitals. Have you ever seen any cases of combat fatigue?
Yes, Dorothy, and I've seen the amazing results that our Army and Navy doctors are getting.
Well, just what do you mean by that?
Well, you take certain Air Force men, for example, who've flown a tremendous number of missions. Here and there, one of these men will develop symptoms of combat fatigue after many missions that were heavy with flak and fighter opposition. These men are cared for at convalescent centers and given every opportunity to get lots of rest and to find some interest or hobby to help take their mind off their trouble. And it's wonderful to see the recovery these men make.
That's an inspiring story, Dick Todd, and I might add it's a fine reason for buying victory bonds. You know, this is the last of the big bond drive. This is the last time you Americans will be asked to buy extra bonds. The quota in this drive for individual buyers is $4 billion. That may seem like a lot of money, but just consider what must be paid for. There's mustering out pay for veterans, loans, education for veterans, and general administration of the GI Bill of Rights. All these things take money, lots of money. Just think, it will take about $1.5 billion just to bring our troops back home from overseas. So all I can say to you 85 million Americans who have bought bonds during this war, remember your job isn't done until you buy those extra victory bonds. And I hope you'll take that thought away with you, because I know that if you do, then Dick Todd will have felt these few minutes here on the radio were certainly well spent.
Well, thank you, Dick Todd, and thank you, Dorothy Kilgallen, for showing us your diary. Now, this is Kelvin Keats saying, for your future, your country's future, buy victory bonds. The program is transcribed. Dorothy Kilgallen's diary, the intimate behind-the-scenes story of Broadway's great stars, revealed by the First Lady of Broadway, the famous columnist and radio personality, Dorothy Kilgallen.
Thank you, Kelvin Keith. My diary shows I recently had a really inspiring experience. As I watched the Queen Elizabeth dock in New York Harbor, I saw a lovely dark-haired girl making her way down the gangplank with difficulty as she was leaning on a pair of crutches. This was Jane Froman, the famous singer who had made headlines back in February in 1943 when the plane on which she and other overseas entertainers were flying crashed at Lisbon. Well, I thought about this as I walked along beside Jane Froman there on the dock, and I said to myself, isn't it wonderful that she's made such an effort to go overseas and entertain servicemen during these past weeks?
Dorothy, I think people would like to hear about the hospitals we visited.
I'm sure they would, Jane. And I'm sure those stories you told me about the care our boys are getting will send many of our listeners out to buy that extra victory bond. You know, folks, Jane Froman sang and entertained at some 50 hospitals in Germany, France, Austria, Czechoslovakia, and England. She traveled 8,000 miles, yes, 8,000 miles, and on crutches. And it just seems to me that if ever a performer could go over there and really help keep up morale among the patients, that girl would be Jane Froman. And that's the kind of spirit our wounded men are showing. Jane, how about singing one of the songs that the boys liked especially over there?
All right, Dorothy, I'd be glad to.
Embrace me, my sweet embrace of you. Embrace me, you irreplaceable you. Just one look at you, my heart beats tipsy in me. You and you alone bring out the gypsy in me. I love all the many charms I've had you. Above all, I want my arms about you. Don't be a naughty baby. Come to mama do. My sweet embrace of all you.
Thank you, Jane. It must have been wonderful for you to play to those audiences. I guess that feeling must be hard to put into words.
Well, I'd say it this way, Dorothy Kilgallen. Buy those victory bonds.
Right. Yes, millions of Americans are waiting for the millions of service people who've been away so long. And when you think it's going to cost about $1.5 billion to bring those fighting Americans back again, then you'll want to do your share. Because the money you put into victory bonds is going to help bring our veterans home. And I'd say that's a very good moral to draw from this friendly chat with lovely Jane Froman.
Thank you, Jane Froman. And thank you, Dorothy Kilgallen, for showing us your diary. Now, this is Calvin Keith saying save regularly through the payroll savings plan. Buy Victory Bonds.